In the quiet of the private secretary's office, a single copy of a book landed on the desk. The title read, Diana, Her True Story. Inside lay intimate secrets from within the House of Windsor. It spoke of marriage that had become a hollow performance. The palace had denied it all. The princess had even sworn she had nothing to do with it. She was lying. And now every bookshelf in Britain held the truth. 5 months later, on a gray November morning, the Queen would stand before the Guildhall. Her throat was raw. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the assembled guests. And she would confess to the world that 1992 had been an Annus Horribilis. A horrible year. A year of ruin for the family she had worked so hard to protect. But to understand how we reached this point, we must go back to January. The year opened on a note of quiet triumph for the monarchy. On the 6th of February, the Queen marked 40 years on the throne. There was no jubilee, no grand procession. She had been firm about that, but she had agreed to one small thing: a documentary to show the family's life. The palace hoped the film would show a united, contented family to the public. The BBC had spent months following her through the rhythms of royal life. Mirzoeff hired familiar faces to ensure the Queen felt comfortable on camera. She let them in. They caught her at Balmoral with her grandchildren and ponies. They filmed her hosting presidents aboard the royal yacht Britannia. In her own voice, she reflected on the unique nature of her existence. Most people have a job, and then they go home, she mused quietly. In this existence, the job and the life go on together. You cannot really divide it up. It is a singular, lifelong commitment. I think this is what the younger members find difficult, the regimented side. She did not need to name them. She did not need to. The film Elizabeth R. aired in January to warm reviews across the nation. For a few days, the public saw exactly what the palace intended: a kindly, energetic matriarch. A contented and united royal family. It was an illusion, and it was already beginning to crack. Behind the composed image, the marriages of her 3 eldest children were falling apart. The Queen had been trained since girlhood to keep her private anguish private. But those who stood close to her noticed a new weariness. A stillness that was not peace, something closer to growing dread. Over dinner with close friends? She asked, almost in wonder. Can you imagine having 2 daughters-in-law like this? She asked quietly. The first blow came through a newspaper, as it so often did. Photographs surfaced of the Duchess of York with an American executive. The images showed a closeness that was clearly more than friendship. Andrew and Sarah began consulting divorce lawyers almost immediately after. The Queen asked them to wait, to give it 6 more months. Perhaps time could mend what the cameras had torn open. But the press had already begun to circle the palace gates. By March, the formal separation was announced to the world. The story was so consuming, it bumped the general election off the front pages. It was a humiliation that the Queen had never anticipated. Those who saw her in those weeks noticed the heavy cost. And then, the following morning, she transformed herself completely. She was smiling broadly, joining an estate gamekeeper to go ferreting. It was a pattern that would repeat through the dark months. The animals asked nothing of her but her simple presence. April brought no relief to the embattled house of Windsor. Anne, the Princess Royal, and Captain Mark Phillips had been separated for years. On the 9th of April, their divorce was finally made official. 2 marriages, 2 announcements. The year was only 4 months old. Elizabeth said nothing publicly. She never allowed herself to. But those close to her observed a profound change in her. A growing quietness, a withdrawal that went beyond her natural reserve. She had believed in those marriages with a pure, childlike faith. She had thought that vows and duty would hold them all together. It had not, and privately, she was beginning to ask why. Then came the whispers. They reached the palace in fragments. A journalist had been speaking to people close to the Princess of Wales. A book was coming. Something significant, something deeply damaging. The palace did not yet know the full shape of the threat. But those who served the Queen could see the effect on her. Diana, meanwhile, was in a fragile and precarious state of mind. Years of isolation within the family had taken their toll. The marriage had been effectively over for a long time. And now she had found a way to finally speak. She spoke through a journalist who had won her trust. She had given Andrew Morton access to these taped interviews. She answered every question. She described her eating disorder. She spoke of her alleged attempts to hurt herself. Her desperate, unheard cries for help within a family that did not know how to respond to vulnerability. The palace did not yet know, but they knew something was coming. On the 7th of June, 1992, Diana, her true story, was published. It sold out within hours as the nation rushed to read it. The revelations were unlike anything the public had ever encountered. A princess who had been silently falling apart behind palace walls. The fairy tale was officially dead. The truth was now public. The public learned of a princess who had been deeply unhappy. 5 suicide attempts were detailed in the pages of the book. A husband long absent from the marriage, and a mother-in-law who had not known how to reach her. The palace issued a brief statement, but it denied nothing specific. The Queen learned the contents not from her staff, but from the press. She read the headlines in silence, as she always did. She read in silence. She always read in absolute silence. What she said to those around her was sparse and guarded. "I don't understand it," she was heard to say more than once. She did not understand the rupture or the public exposure. Her family's interior life was now being discussed in every home. She had spent 40 years protecting the privacy of her family. She could not comprehend why anyone would choose to show themselves. The sympathy of the public had shifted decisively away from the crown. The palace attempted a response to the growing public outcry. Briefings were given. Courtiers spoke off the record to journalists. They tried to frame the narrative as Diana's personal instability. but the public had already decided who they believed. For the first time, Elizabeth faced a crisis she could not answer. This was not a constitutional or political storm. Those she understood. This was different. This was her family laid bare to the world. And the year was only half over. The worst was yet to come. The weeks that followed were unlike anything her household had known. The press gathered outside every royal residence across the country. Photographers were at the gates. Journalists reconstructed private talks. The palace had operated on a certain dignified silence for decades. Now, it found itself in a new and incredibly hostile landscape. Inside, those who served the Queen noticed a profound change. She did not weep. She did not allow herself to rage. She would not have permitted herself such an emotional outburst. But the stillness that settled over her was different from before. It was the stillness of a woman who was simply, quietly enduring. She had been prepared for everything: abdication, wars, and political crises. The protocol for each had been established long before her reign. There was no protocol for the public dismantling of her family. Her entire identity had been built around the royal institution. And now, that very institution was being dismantled in public. She could not stop it. She could only watch it all happen. The year of 1992 was already a disaster, and it was only June. In 40 years as queen, Elizabeth had survived more than most. She had done it through stillness and a refusal to show the cost. But 1992 was different. The very foundation was now shaking. She had built the crown through the image of her own family. It had been a performance of permanence for 40 long years. Now, that carefully built performance was unraveling in public. It was unraveling publicly, and it seemed quite irreversibly. The year was only half over, and the worst was still to come. The monarchy was facing its greatest challenge of the modern era. The Queen was alone in her struggle to save the crown. In Part 2, a massive fire will break out in the home she loves most. She will stand in the cold and watch her history burn before her eyes. She will deliver a speech that will shock and surprise the entire nation. Not for its anger, but for something far rarer, its absolute honesty. The year 1992 was truly her Annus Horribilis. The marriage that defined the modern monarchy will finally end. The world will watch as the royal couple officially separates. It will be broadcast live on television for the entire nation to see. The worst was indeed still to come.